Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a moment of just pure historical whiplash. August 6th, 1945.
Right.
What happens when your entire war strategy, everything you've banked on, gets erased by a single bomb? And the generals in charge literally cannot compute the data coming in.
It's the ultimate collision of reality and doctrine, isn't it? You have this state of pure strategic cognitive dissonance in Tokyo. The
Yeah.
highest command is completely dug in. They're obsessed with these final, desperate plans for defending the homeland, preparing for a long, bloody, conventional fight.
They were thinking about the beaches, the mountains,
Yeah.
the human cost of a ground invasion.
Exactly.
Their whole defense was built on the idea that America, for all its industrial might, was still playing by the old rules. High explosives, ships, men.
The assumption was they could bleed the Allies dry, force them to the negotiating table.
And that entire strategy had a name, right? It's central to this whole story.
It is. Kitugo. Operation Decisive. And it wasn't just a military plan. It was almost a national religion by that point.
Okay, so let's define that really clearly for everyone listening, because the total collapse of Kitugo is, well, it's the whole point.
Absolutely. So Kitugo was a strategy of total national mobilization for what was essentially suicidal resistance.
Not just soldiers.
No, everyone. The military assumed the U.S. would launch a huge two-stage invasion, first Kyushu, then the Tokyo Plain itself. So they mobilized nearly 2 million regular soldiers, and this is the crucial part. They armed millions of civilians.
Arm them with what exactly?
With bamboo spears, old swords, antiquated rifles, men, women, even children. The goal wasn't to win.
No, the goal was to inflict such horrific casualties on the American invaders.
Yes. They calculated they could cause over 500,000 American casualties in just the first couple of months.
The strategic aim was political. They wanted the American public to just say, enough, this isn't worth it.
Yeah.
Force Washington to offer a conditional peace.
A peace that would preserve the emperor, the whole national structure. It was a strategy totally dependent on American casualty tolerance.
But all of that, every bit of that desperate plan, it required one thing to be true.
It required cities, it required logistics, geography, and cities to supply and sustain those defenders on the coast.
And then, at 8:15 in the morning in Tokyo, that entire strategy just hits a brick wall. A wall made of absolute, inexplicable silence.
Yeah.
The phone lines, the radio, the telegraph circuits, everything connecting the capital to Hiroshima, which was a major military hub 500 miles away. It all just goes dead.
And that's where our deep dive begins. We're going to track the hours and then the days following that silence. What happens when a city of 350,000 people is just erased, but the generals can't believe it? Because if they believe it, they have to admit Kitugo is irrelevant.
We're going to follow the arguments, the denial, and that painful realization, really through the eyes of three key figures.
Right.
You have Colonel Arakawa Notoki, the skeptic, who was convinced it was all an elaborate American bluff.
Then there's the chief of operations, who first suspected equipment failure, but then this terrible dread starts to set in.
And finally, Dr. Yoshio Nishi, the brilliant nuclear physicist whose cold, hard calculations bring a new kind of scientific terror right into the war room.
It's a psychological freefall, from utter denial to this agonizing necessary acceptance.
So let's start right there, in that nerve center, the underground war headquarters in Tokyo. The communications blackout is immediate, it's total, and in a war, silence is almost never a good sign.
And this wasn't just a line going down. At 8:15 a.m., every single connection snapped. We're talking about redundant systems.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
The dedicated military circuits, the telegraph offices, the civilian phone exchanges, and the main public broadcasting station. That station officially went off the air at 8:16 a.m., 1 minute later.
So the comms officers in Tokyo, they don't panic right away. They start troubleshooting.
Of course, that's their job. For hours, some accounts say 6 straight hours, they're trying to patch a connection through to get a single clear signal.
And what do they get back?
Nothing. Static. Or, as one report chillingly put it, nothing at all.
I can't imagine the feeling, being an operator and just hearing dead air where a massive city, a military command, is supposed to be.
The initial reaction from some of the general staff officers was, well, it was denial. It had to be simple equipment failure.
Something in Tokyo, maybe?
Right. Faulty gear in Tokyo, or maybe a localized power outage in Hiroshima. That was the comfort zone. That was the explanation that didn't break their worldview.
But here's the thing. They'd been getting firebombed for months. They'd seen entire sections of Tokyo gutted by B-29s. Why was this communications failure so different?
Because the little bits of information that started to trickle in later were just wildly contradictory.
That was so.
See, they knew the pattern of a firebombing raid. You get huge waves of bombers, then these spreading firestorms. This was different. Scattered dispatches from stations maybe 30, 40 miles outside Hiroshima. They reported two things that just couldn't both be true at the same time.
Okay, what were those two narratives?
The first was this blinding white flash, so intense it turned the morning sky into the brightest noon for just an instant.
Yeah. And the second?
Then the chaos. Some reports claimed everything was burning, a firestorm that swallowed the whole city. But then, completely contradicting that, other reports came in saying there was nothing left to burn.
Nothing left to burn.
That the city was simply gone.
Total erasure versus a spreading fire. You're right. Those two ideas can't coexist in conventional war. A fire needs time to spread. It doesn't just instantly erase everything.
And that leads us to the one detail that just froze the entire war room. The intelligence officer gets asked the standard questions. How many bombers? What kind of ordnance?
And his answer?
4 words that stopped all conversation. 1 bomber, possibly 1 bomb.
1 bomber, 1 bomb. If you're a general, and your entire life is about calculating bomb loads and tonnage and blast radiuses, that report is just strategically indigestible. It breaks the laws of physics as you know them.
It absolutely does. You can't just delete a city with its reinforced factories and military headquarters and miles of infrastructure with 1 conventional bomb. It would take hundreds, maybe thousands of tons of explosives and incendiaries. The idea of 1 plane doing what a fleet of hundreds of B-29s did to Tokyo, it was just impossible to them.
So if it wasn't a single bomb, what was the preferred explanation? What was that comfort zone you mentioned?
The first theory, the one the operations officer put forward, was mechanical. It had to be a massive fuel depot explosion, a lucky strike that somehow severed all the communication lines at once.
Okay.
That explains the silence, it explains the local panic, and it keeps their entire strategic worldview intact.
But then you get Colonel Arakawa no Toki. He takes the denial a step further.
Arakawa was the true skeptic. He argued that the reports were just too fantastic to be real, therefore it had to be American psychological warfare.
A psyop?
Exactly. He called the 1 bomb report impossible and was adamant it was a trick, a deception designed to create panic in Tokyo, to make them surrender out of fear, not out of actual military defeat.
And you can see why that theory would be so appealing, can't you?
Oh, completely.
Because if it's a bluff, you can call it. You can stick to your plan to Getugo. You can continue down this path of honorable resistance, and your entire doctrine is still valid.
But you can't argue against dead silence forever. The tension was building, the searing flash, the mushroom cloud reports. It all demanded a real answer. They needed proof. The question was shifting from if the reports were exaggerated to by how much. So the military leadership is just ideologically paralyzed. They can't ignore the silence from Hiroshima, but they refuse to believe the implications of a single bomb.
So what broke the deadlock? What forced them to move from just denying it to actually investigating?
The arrival of very specific third-party testimony, a data point that they couldn't just write off as panic or propaganda.
This is the report from the periphery. From the railway signalmen stationed about 30 miles outside the city.
Yes, and crucially, these aren't panicked civilians. These are trained technical personnel. They're used to stress, they're used to making precise observations. And they broke protocol to send these urgent, unencrypted messages back to Tokyo.
Unencrypted.
The source material even notes that the handwriting on the actual report was shaky. Words were crossed out, sentences rushed. They were trying to describe something completely outside their experience.
And what they saw wasn't just smoke from a fire. It was something different.
Entirely different. They described a massive cloud formation, a thick column of something, rising high into the stratosphere. And here's the key word. They said it mushroomed at the top.
The mushroom cloud.
It spread out like a cap, climbing higher than any cloud they had ever seen, maybe 6 miles high. This shape was completely alien to their experience of conventional explosions.
And then came the physical evidence of the sheer force involved.
They testified to being physically knocked down, thrown to the ground by a shockwave that reached them 30 miles away from the city center.
30 miles. Just think about the energy needed for that. To travel that far and still have enough power to snap telephone poles and shatter windows?
A conventional bomb creates a localized blast. This was a wide area event. It pointed to a blast magnitude that no single weapon they knew of could possibly achieve.
So as the General Staff's operations officer is reading this report, the mushroom shape, the shockwave. The source says his expression just darkens with dread.
Right. He wasn't a physicist, but he had context.
He knew about their own atomic research program.
He knew about Japan's own struggling, tiny, underfunded research into atomic fission. He knew the theory was out there. And if America hadn't just figured out the theory, but had actually weaponized it,
Then everything changes.
then every single assumption Katuga was built on, the whole idea of a long, drawn-out conventional fight, was, as he put it, meaningless. Every defensive strategy they had was obsolete in an instant.
The possibility of what it could be made the reality of the unknown even more terrifying.
Yes, but still, Colonel Arakawa, holding on to his PSYOP theory, refused to accept it. The testimony of a few signalmen wasn't enough.
He wanted military verification.
He demanded direct verification from a senior military officer. He wanted tactical facts, not what he called rumors of giant clouds.
And so the order was given.
Major Tsunumi Kotaro, a young, respected reconnaissance officer, was ordered to fly to Hiroshima immediately.
Did he know what he was flying into?
No. He left thinking he was heading into the aftermath of a really big conventional explosion. A disaster, sure, but a disaster they could understand. His orders were simple: land if you can, assess the damage, and report back with facts instead of panic. He was flying to confirm the conventional. He was about to witness the impossible.
Major Kotaro's flight. This is the moment the military establishment is forced to look at the unvarnished truth, isn't it?
It is. He approaches the city and the reality starts to sink in long before he even sees the ground. As the plane got near Hiroshima, the pilot radioed back that the smoke was just too thick to even think about landing. But it wasn't just smoke. It was this vast, towering column, still rising, still spreading out.
Still mushrooming.
Yes. The pilot is circling, trying to find a way in, and then the radio just goes silent for 3 agonizing minutes. The sheer scale of it just overwhelmed their ability to describe it.
And when the pilot's voice finally came back,
The source described it as hollow. The airfield was gone, just gone, reduced to debris. But Kotaro ordered him to fly low, right over the geographic center of where Hiroshima used to be.
and what he saw defied all of his training.
Everything. When you fly over a firebombed city like Tokyo, you see wreckage, but you still see the bones of the city. Burnt out buildings, streets full of debris. What Kotaro saw was an architectural vacuum.
He reported seeing only the outline of rivers and bridges like lines drawn on scorched earth.
That phrase, scorched earth, is so important. It's not just fire damage. It implies heat so intense and pressure so absolute that almost everything that once stood above ground was flattened or vaporized or just turned to dust.
The landscape had been ironed flat.
The only things he could recognize were the natural features, the curves of the rivers, the stone foundations of the bridges. Everything man-made was gone.
And he noted 2 crucial physical details that just demolished the conventional explanation. The first was the geometry of the damage.
It was perfectly circular. This is critical evidence. Conventional bombing is messy. It creates chaotic, scattered damage. Kotaro confirmed a uniform circle of total devastation, maybe a 2-kilometer radius, extending out from a single definable point ground zero. It was like a giant compass had just been drawn on the city, erasing everything inside the circle.
And the second detail was that cloud.
Hours later, it was still there, still rising. And Kotaro specifically observed that the cloud was glowing from within. It was still radiating heat and energy. This wasn't a normal fire. This was something else entirely. An ongoing, terrifying event.
And the human cost. Seen from a low altitude, it must have been just.
Unspeakable. He confirmed survivors were staggering, not walking. Their clothes were often just gone. He described their skin hanging in strips, a detail that speaks to burns beyond anything conventional.
Oh, God.
The rivers were choked with corpses. He saw people wandering blindly, their eyes burned out. He filled 3 pages of his notepad, and his neat military script just dissolved into frantic, shaking lines.
He flies back to Tokyo. The high command is waiting, tense, still arguing, expecting a tactical report.
They want numbers. Factory damage, rail yard assessment.
And Major Kotaro, this combat veteran, stands before the most powerful generals in Japan and delivers an assessment with no tactical data at all. Just 4 words.
The city is gone.
That finality, that simplicity, it must have just shattered what was left of their denial.
It did. But it was the description he offered next that became legendary.
What did he say?
He tried to summarize it all. He said, "It is as though a monstrous hand pressed the city into the earth."
Wow.
It's an almost mythological image, isn't it? But it captures the truth of the force he saw. The destruction wasn't from fire or shrapnel. It was from a crushing, overwhelming pressure.
The sources say that one sentence made the whole room fall silent.
It did. It just superseded all their tactical doctrine because it described a force that was unnatural, incomprehensible, and they were beginning to realize unstoppable. The military had run out of conventional explanations.
They needed a new vocabulary.
They needed the language of science. The question was no longer, did this happen? It was, what in God's name made this happen?
So the military's playbook is useless. They're forced to turn to science. And this brings Dr. Yoshio Nishi into the war room.
Japan's leading nuclear physicist, a man who had studied under Niels Bohr in Copenhagen. He was one of the very few people in the entire country who could possibly understand the theory behind what Major Kitaro had just described.
He doesn't show up with military maps. He shows up with his notebooks.
His theoretical notebooks, exactly. He's the quiet academic head of Japan's very small, very underfunded atomic research program. But he was able to take all these contradictory reports, the flash, the circular flattening, the reports of strange sickness, and synthesize them into one coherent, terrifying explanation.
He matched the observations to the theory.
He did. Let's walk through it, because this is the moment the general staff is forced to accept fact over faith. Let's start with the flash.
The blinding white flash.
Witnesses miles away said it was brighter than the sun. They found shadows literally burned into concrete walls. Nishi confirmed this was perfectly consistent with thermal radiation from fission.
Not a chemical explosion.
No. A conventional explosion releases its energy mainly as a blast wave in fire. Fission releases a huge amount of its energy as an immense wave of light and heat, traveling at the speed of light. The temperatures reach thousands of degrees Celsius, like the surface of the sun.
And that light wave is what caused the terrible flash burns Kitaro saw.
Precisely. These weren't burns from the city catching fire later. These were radiation burns caused by the light pulse itself in the first millisecond of the explosion.
Oh, wow.
And the key detail Nishi pointed out was the pattern. Victims were burned only on the side of their body facing the explosion. The side facing away could be completely untouched, shielded by their own body.
Which proves it was a single, instantaneous light source.
Exactly. It arrived before the sound, before the blast wave. You couldn't duck. The light was just too fast.
Okay, so Nishi then moves on to the sheer scale of the destruction. He takes that 2-kilometer radius of total flattening.
And he works backwards. He calculates the force required to do that. And this is where the numbers become just staggering for the generals.
What was his estimate?
Nishi calculated that to achieve that kind of instantaneous circular destruction, you'd need an explosive force of about 15,000 tons of TNT.
15,000 tons.
To put that in perspective for them, that's the equivalent of more than 100 fully loaded B-29s, all dropping their bombs at the exact same time in the exact same spot.
One bomb did the work of an entire air fleet.
And finally, he addressed the signature, the thing the signalmen saw 30 miles away.
The mushroom cloud.
Nishi confirmed it. That distinctive column and cap shape was the theoretical signature of an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. It was the visual proof that the explosion wasn't chemical, it was atomic.
I'm just imagining being a general. Your whole life is artillery and firepower, and you're listening to this quiet academic explain the splitting of the atom. How did Nishi even make that comprehensible?
He had to simplify it. He explained fission as a chain reaction. He said, think of it like a dense pile of unstable dominoes. One neutron splits one atom. That releases energy and more neutrons, which then hit 2 more atoms, which hit 4, which hit 8, and so on. It's an exponential reaction that happens in less than a millionth of a second. The energy release is total and instantaneous.
And that explains why only one plane was needed.
Precisely. The bomb itself was maybe 3 meters long, weighed about 4,000 kilos, easy for a single B-29. The power wasn't in the size of the bomb, it was in the concentration of energy inside it.
At this point, General Anami, the war minister, he's still not having it.
No. He cuts in, calls Nishi's explanation speculation, guesswork. He wants physical proof, not theories from Europe.
But the strategic terror must have been sinking in, especially when Nishi confirmed America's technological superiority.
That was the nail in the coffin. An officer asked, well, if this is possible, why didn't Japan build one? And Nishi's answer was just devastating: resources.
The industrial gap.
Japan simply lacked the specialized equipment, the enormous industrial capacity, the sheer electrical power needed to enrich uranium. America had built entire secret cities, Oak Ridge, Hanford, just to produce the fuel. Japan had a couple of scientists in a basement. Nishi's explanation confirmed this technological chasm was unbridgeable.
And this is the real aha moment
Yeah.
of pure terror. Colonel Arakawa, the original skeptic who thought it was all a bluff.
He does the math out loud. He says, Japan has about 60 major cities left. If America has 60 of these bombs, the Japanese nation ceases to exist.
Even if they only have 10.
Even 10 means 10 cities gone, millions dead, and the industrial base for any kind of resistance completely wiped out.
The silence that followed that it wasn't confusion anymore, was it?
No, it was the raw, paralyzing fear of strategic irrelevance. Their whole defense was based on a conventional war of attrition. Now, defense was meaningless. Foreign Minister Togo, listening to all this, finally says the truth out loud. If these facts are confirmed, continuing the war is national suicide.
So this new horrifying reality of the atomic bomb, it just forces this ideological split in the high command right out into the open.
It does. The next morning, August 7th, and in the days that followed, the Big Six, the Supreme Council for the direction of the war, they gather. And the result is a perfect, paralyzed deadlock.
3 against 3.
3 against 3. In the peace faction, you have Prime Minister Suzuki, Foreign Minister Togo, and Navy Minister Yonai. They see the war as lost, and they want to save what's left of the nation.
And the war faction.
War Minister Inami, General Umiyu, and Admiral Toyota. 3 men clinging to the concept of honor, 3 men arguing for survival.
Kogo really championed the Pete's case, didn't he? His argument was purely pragmatic.
It was. He said, look, the bomb changes everything. The Katugo strategy needs a nation to exist in order to work. Atomic bombs remove that foundation. The highest duty is no longer to fight to the last man. It's to protect the emperor's subjects from annihilation.
He argued that you can't fight on the beaches if America could just erase the city supplying the beaches.
Exactly. Suzuki backed him up, stressing that every single day they continued to risk another city being wiped off the map.
And the war case, led by Inami. What was their argument against that?
It was rooted in the warrior code, honor and sacrifice. Inami argued that surrender would be a betrayal of the millions of soldiers and civilians who had already died. He felt the military could not commit that ultimate dishonor.
But it was General Umiyu who was really the key skeptic on their side.
Yes. Umiyu was convinced America was bluffing. He maintained they couldn't possibly have a stockpile of these things. Hiroshima, he argued, was a one-off, a technical stunt they were using to scare Japan into surrendering. He believed they could still hold out and force better terms.
And this argument just goes around and around for hours. It's not just a military debate anymore, it's a psychological crisis.
It is, because to admit the atomic bomb works is to admit that 4 years of unbelievable sacrifice, that all those lives led to nothing, that the entire premise of the war was wrong, that psychological cost was just too high for the hardliners to pay.
But while they're stuck in this ideological paralysis, new reports start coming in from Hiroshima about something even more horrifying.
Radiation sickness.
This detail must have just deepened the dread. An invisible, slow killer.
Medical teams who had entered the city days after the bombing, and even survivors who seemed to have only minor injuries. They were suddenly getting gravely ill.
What were the symptoms?
The local doctors were baffled. Uncontrollable vomiting, hair falling out in clumps, skin just sloughing off, and internal hemorrhaging.
So they called Dr. Nishi back into the war room.
Yes, to explain this unseen contamination. He confirms that the bomb didn't just explode with heat and pressure. It released a massive dose of ionizing radiation, a cellular poison.
Explain that for us. Why those specific gruesome symptoms?
Because radiation targets the parts of the body that rely on constant cell regeneration. It destroyed the bone marrow, which makes blood cells, leading to internal bleeding and infection. It destroyed the lining of the digestive tract, causing the vomiting. The hair follicles die, causing baldness.
So Nishi explained that Hiroshima wasn't just destroyed.
It was poisoned. The ground itself was contaminated. Anyone who entered the area risked a slow, agonizing death.
This detail. It shook even the hardliners, didn't it?
It did. Death in battle, death by fire. These were horrors they understood. But being killed by a ghost, having your body turn against you days after the event, that was a horror beyond their military vocabulary.
But still, the deadlock held.
Even with this new terror, the impasse solidified. 3 against 3. The argument went on into the night with no resolution. They were paralyzed by honor and by a tradition that said they couldn't just ask the emperor to solve their problems.
So General Umiyu and the war faction had bet everything on one idea. America was bluffing. They only had one of these bombs.
That was their last hope, and the answer to that gamble arrived with brutal speed.
How did the news come?
It's late on August 9th. The Big Six are still in their underground chamber, still deadlocked, when a messenger rushes in with a telegram. Prime Minister Suzuki reads it, and apparently the color just drains from his face.
And he says,
4 words. A second bomb has fallen.
Nagasaki. 3 days after Hiroshima. Erased.
General Umeyo is instantly, catastrophically wrong. The source says Admiral Toyota just closed his eyes in defeat. America was not bluffing. They had an arsenal.
The psychological impact must have been immense. This wasn't an anomaly anymore. It was a pattern.
A repeatable pattern. The reconnaissance reports confirmed it was identical. One bomber, the B-29 Boxcar 1 bomb, a blinding flash, a mushroom cloud, and that same circular, instantaneous destruction.
So the calculation for the high command changes completely.
Overnight. The question is no longer if Japan will surrender, but when. Before America drops the next 10 or 20 bombs, they realized America had an operational pipeline. The bombs would just keep coming.
Anami himself, the strongest voice for war, was shaken.
He asked, how many of these do they have? Can they erase every city we have? The speed of the second bomb proved that this wasn't some lab experiment. It was mass production.
But the blows just kept coming. Before they can even absorb Nagasaki, another messenger arrives.
With news that eliminated their very last diplomatic hope.
The Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union has declared war and invaded Manchuria.
Which was the absolute collapse of their entire strategic position.
Utterly. Their diplomats had been desperately hoping that Moscow, which had been neutral, would help mediate a peace deal. That hope was just obliterated. Soviet tank columns, veterans from the war against Germany, were overwhelming Japan's most elite force, the Kwannon Army.
So the strategic ground just vanishes from under their feet.
Completely. Now they're facing 2 simultaneous existential threats. Annihilation from the sky by America's atomic bombs, and a massive ground invasion and occupation by the Soviets. And they have no navy, no air force, and no fuel to stop either one.
Navy Minister Yonai is the one who delivers the final crushing blow to the Katugo Doctrine, right?
He does. When the hardliners are still trying to cling to this idea of fighting for better terms, Yonai asks this brutally simple question.
What was it?
He asks, how does the Katugo strategy work when your cities no longer exist? What are 2 million soldiers going to defend? Ashes.
And yet, even after all that, the vote is still 3-3.
Still deadlocked. Ideology was fighting a losing battle with reality. Finally, Prime Minister Suzuki, realizing the country could not afford one more day of debate, proposed the ultimate radical solution, something that violated centuries of precedent.
What did he say?
Only the emperor can decide now.
So the Imperial Conference, it convenes just before midnight on August 9th in this oppressive, silent, underground chamber.
Every military and political leader is there, exhausted, terrified, and tradition dictates the Emperor Hirohito sits in silence. He doesn't rule, he doesn't decide policy, he certainly doesn't break deadlocks.
But tonight is different. The world has been broken by 2 atomic bombs and a Soviet invasion. The stakes are total national extinction.
War Minister Anami makes one last fierce argument for resistance. His voice is thick with emotion. He talks about honor, about preserving national dignity, about accepting death over humiliation.
And Foreign Minister Togo counters with the cold reality. He says, America doesn't need to invade. They'll just keep dropping bombs until every city is ash. The Soviet invasion removes any last hope of a negotiated peace.
The arguments cycle, getting more and more frantic, but still, no decision. The moment required something outside of politics, outside of military doctrine.
And then Emperor Hirohito rises.
And he breaks the silence. He breaks centuries of tradition. The entire chamber just freezes. They know the gravity of this moment. His voice, they say, was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried absolute divine authority.
He starts by acknowledging the power of the new weapon.
Yeah, he validates their shock. He says, the enemy has employed a new and most cruel bomb. Its power to damage is indeed incalculable. He speaks calmly, methodically, and he focuses not on honor, but on the people.
He lays out the choice.
He says that continuing the war will mean the collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. He says his innocent people will be utterly destroyed if the war goes on.
And that was the pivot. He chose the survival of his people over the abstract idea of military honor. He chose existence.
He did. He concluded with that famous decree. I cannot bear to see my innocent people suffer any longer. The time has come to bear the unbearable, to endure what cannot be endured. I have decided that we must accept the Allied terms. We will end this war.
The reaction in the room must have been
Profound shock and deep, deep grief. General Anami's body was seen trembling as he bowed his head, hiding his face, just unable to control his devastation.
But the decision was final, unchallengeable.
The highest authority in the land had chosen survival, and in one soft sentence, he shattered the warrior code that had defined the Japanese imperial military for centuries. The debate was over.
So the path from denial to acceptance was complete, a rapid, agonizing psychological freefall.
It was, from Colonel Arakawa being convinced it was all a bluff, to Dr. Nishi's inescapable science, and finally to the Emperor's command.
But that acceptance didn't come easily for everyone. The internal conflict was just so deep.
So deeply ingrained in that warrior ethos. Even after the Emperor's decision, the hardliners fought it. As they were preparing to broadcast the Emperor's surrender speech, a group of mid-ranking officers launched a desperate, failed coup attempt on August 14th.
They tried to seize the imperial palace.
They did, to find the recording of the speech and destroy it, to stop the broadcast from ever happening.
And the death of that old military order was marked by these incredible personal tragedies.
War Minister Anami, the fierce defender of honor to the very end, he chose ritual suicide, seppuku, on the night of the 14th. He left a note apologizing for his failure.
And he wasn't the only one.
No. Vice Admiral Onishi, the man who founded the kamikaze program, he did the same. He couldn't live with the outcome. Their actions really symbolize the final bloody death of that centuries-old samurai code.
Yoshio Nishi, the physicist who brought them the terrible truth, he later reflected that the vanishing of Hiroshima changed not just Japan,
but all of humanity. The High Command realized with terrifying speed that conventional military power was irrelevant. Geography, the protection of oceans and distance, was meaningless. They were facing guaranteed annihilation from the sky.
A young staff officer, the one staring at the reconnaissance photos, he really summarized it best.
What did he say?
He just said quietly, a city disappeared, and with it the old Japan.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought, one that stretches from 1945 all the way to today.
Go on.
This moment, this forced abandonment of centuries of honor and doctrine just to ensure national survival, it shows the ultimate relationship between technology, power, and existence. If the most entrenched military machine on Earth could be rendered obsolete by one mom, what does that tell us about today? How do nations define their security or their identity when a single, unstoppable technological leap can make all previous strategies meaningless? When you can erase a city from 500 miles away, what exactly are you defending? Is the battle for territory anymore, or is it for existence itself? That's the terrifying lesson burned into history by the vanishing of Hiroshima.